Welcome, everyone. Hi. Welcome, everyone, to another session of the PowerCat AI webinars series. For those, and I say this every time, but I do mean it, for those of you who have joined us before, welcome back. And for everyone who's new, it's good to see you. These sessions are really focused on helping your organization transform with Copilot Studio and helping you guys basically adopt that. So I am your host, Ashley, or one of your hosts, I should say, Ashley. And I'm just going to be, behind the scenes, making sure things run smoothly. And then we have our two speakers, Henri and Hassan, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hey, I'll start. I'm Henri Jam. I'm a PowerCat Principal Program Manager, focusing on Copilot Studio, and I'm very happy to talk to you today about ALM in Copilot Studio.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. This is Hazem. I'm also from PowerCat team, focused on Copilot Studio as well, and part of the same team as Henri.
Okay, so now let's get into Application Lifecycle Management, ALM, with Copilot Studio. So for this meeting, the way it's going to work is we're going to have the intro to ALM. What is it? Why is it important? ALM for Copilot Studio specifically, which I know we're all excited about, from the basics to advanced. And then we're going to wrap up with key takeaways and that Q&A that I keep going back to.
Perfect. So I know that we have, given the diverse audience that we have today, we're going to be going very briefly and quickly through some of the key concepts when it comes to ALM, so that in order not to leave anyone behind. And one other important thing to also mention at the beginning, that the focus of this session is going to be mainly on Copilot Studio Agent. So you might be familiar, hopefully, with the difference between declarative agents or custom agents, mainly between declarative agents and custom agents. Declarative is mainly referred to also as M365 Copilot agents. So this is if you're starting from M365 and then creating your experience from there versus starting within Copilot Studio and creating your own custom agent. So it's going to be mainly more focused on the latter, starting from Copilot Studio and what is referred to as custom agents. And the thing about ALM is, you might already know, it stands for Application Lifecycle Management, but the important part is the life cycle, which basically means that it doesn't necessarily have a start and end until or unless you're about to retire and decommission your solution. So it starts very early on the initiation phase, and it goes all the way to building your, I'll just use the term solution, even though that it's kind of an overloaded term, given that it's internally also used inside Power Platform. But think of your solution here in the context of like your end-to-end solution to solving a business problem. And it goes all the way to testing and deploying your solution to production. So why is it important? Because typically early phases, when you just like have an idea or building a POC or think about even doing a pilot, typically most of the teams and individuals, they don't really have to worry about all the details that are associated with that. They just like get excited, build their own agent or solution. And then later on, as you move on to try to scale and figure out how you can take this same agent or solution to production, this is where you start to find out that there is actually more that you need to take into consideration. And that takes us to the other important point or concept to keep in mind, that most of the time when we say ALM, it's just like the focus is mainly around tools and sometimes even processes, but there is more beyond just tools and processes. Ideally, you should have goals in mind, and that, as we will see in a minute, and as Henri will cover later, there are like detailed planning ideally that is required in order to set and establish goals for your, let's say, something along the lines of your environment strategy. And what does that mean? It's like, are the individuals in your organization going to be using a shared environment to build their agents, are going to be using their own individual developer environment? And then if this is the process, are you going to be having a kind of a shared testing environment? And then how's your agent and solution eventually move over time from dev to test to production? And what are the sort of guardrails that you need to have in place in order to establish that? And even internally, in terms of the processes, what type of documentation do you need to have in place in order to educate your own users about the fact that, for instance, that they ideally need to build the agents inside solutions instead of just like building them outside of solution, and the fact that, let's say, if they're going to be using their own environment, they shouldn't be using default, and so on. So again, there are like lots of consideration to keep in mind when we talk about ALM that just goes beyond tools. And then when it comes to the benefits and expectation around the use of ALM, it becomes important and critical in the case of agents. I mean, it's typically important and ideal in terms of managing the quality and the reliability of your release process and so on. But it's really important when it comes to agent, due to the fact that ideally once you deploy your agents, let's say that you're used some advanced features like generative AI, and then you will start monitoring the performance of your agent. You'll start measuring ideally things like resolution rates, the performance of your topic and designing of your topics and so on. And then you will go back and enhance and improve those design aspects. And you might introduce new topics, for instance. You might tweak or fine-tune your prompts. And then eventually you would like to be able to reliably push the new updates without compromising the quality of your existing and a production Copilot agent. And that means that you have to have a reliable process, mainly through your ALM process, in order not to, at least let's say, for example, you would like to make sure that you run some sort of regression testing so that you don't compromise the quality by introducing or tweaking one aspect, you end up impacting the rest of your implementation. So as I briefly mentioned, that like establishing that kind of high-level plan brings in more clarity and crystallize some of the existing features and concepts that exist inside and are supported today inside our platform and Copilot Studio. I mentioned the example of environment strategy. When you start thinking about your environment strategy and what does that mean and how you would like to implement it, features like managed environment, environment routing, environment groups, then make more sense in terms of providing you with the capabilities and tools to go and execute in that. And then there are a number of other examples we talked about, like briefly regression testing. Think about like Copilot Toolkit and how you can leverage such a feature or such a tool in order to achieve that goal. So keep that in mind. Just like start at the broader, higher level concept, and then you narrow it down into like the specific set of existing tools and features that are supported today, and then how can you leverage that to achieve that end goal. We know that most of the time people and teams are overwhelmed by the existing set of features that are required steps and whatnot. And to address that, we have put together a concise and comprehensive guide. If you visit AKMS/MCS_SG, stands for Security Guide, you will find a guide that provides you with all the required key steps and different areas that you need to consider for each phase. So think about like, I'm just about to start my project of building a new Copilot. Now I'm still in the discovery and planning. What do I really need to consider and care about? Now I've moved to the building and integration. What aspects of ALM and even governance and security do I need to take into consideration? So you'll find out a breakdown of the different key items checklist that you need to go through and areas that you need to take into consideration throughout the different phases of your project. And also, if you are interested in learning more about the specifics, I saw from the poll that we ran earlier that not necessarily all the people are quite familiar with the ALM concepts and constructs that exist today. You can go to AKMS Power Platform ALM, and you'll find more resources to educate you more about this.
I assume you see my screen. Just right before we go deeper in like the technical like discussions, don't worry. Like we'll go from 100 to 300. It's going to be fine. Let's see how customers use ALM in their projects today. One customer I love to highlight is one I worked closely with. It's an enterprise customer. It's a bank, ABN AMRO. They're a bank in the Netherlands, and of course, they use application lifecycle management and continuous integration and deployment. And I wanted to share a little bit more about them. Just for background, so they're a bank. They operate in personal and business banking, wealth management, and corporate banking. And you may know them if you're from Europe, especially from the Netherlands, where they are primarily located and operating. And we helped them, the Parquet team, deploy Copilot Studio last year. And it's quite a large agent because their agent manages. So you have some key numbers here, but it's an agent on Copilot Studio that's both available over the phone. So when you call the bank, it's actually Copilot Studio that interacts with the user over the phone with an interactive voice server, and they get like 1.5 million conversations a year over that channel. And they also have a text version of that agent that's deployed on their mobile app, the bank mobile app, and on their website, and it handles 2 million conversations per year with their chatbot Anna. So just some key element of scale here from one of our customers. And of course, like any customer, large enterprise customer, or they often have an IT landscape they have to integrate with. And for ABN AMRO, this is their architecture. We won't go too deep in their architecture, but one of the key aspects that's relevant for today's presentation is that for continuous integration, so to continuously deploy from dev to test to prod, etc., they use Azure DevOps. And I will do a quick demo of Azure DevOps pipeline at the end of my presentation so that they do the source control of their different assets. Because they use Azure AI language, they also deploy whatever they do in Azure also through Azure DevOps. And I think one of the key reasons customers use Azure DevOps for automating deployment and source control is that it can not only control your Copilot Studio and Power Platform artifacts, but it can also help you deploy Azure workloads. And so that was the key. Just a small customer spotlight to discuss ALM. Now, let's dive in. And I loved reading some of the concerns you had or challenges you had on Copilot Studio for ALM. I'm hoping to address some of them today in the presentation. So if you're not familiar with ALM broadly in Copilot Studio, but for Power Platform, it's the same kind of principles. You basically use, you have environments that represents your different dev, test, QA, prod, setup. And the reason why you want to have multiple environments is basically if you're working on a V2 of your agent and you have already deployed your V1 in production and your customers are already using V1, you may not want your developers tweaking that version live and impacting production and potentially introducing downtime in production if they make mistakes. So the reason why you have this test, QA, production, and these types of life cycle for ALM is just to make sure you can test your new updates to your agents safely before you roll them out to your end users using solutions. So here, each of these boxes on that screen represents a solution, and solutions are a way to package customizations. So think of them as your agent in Copilot Studio, the topics you configure in Copilot Studio, the knowledge sources, the actions. If you have cloud flows, you can have them as well, and all of those can be part of solutions. You can have one solution that contains everything, or you can compartmentalize your different components in multiple solutions. A good rule of thumb is to only use the same solution if you don't need to ship on a different timeline or schedule. Like, for example, here, maybe you want to just ship an update to your knowledge sources, but don't want to ship an update to your cloud flows. It's a good reason to have like two different solutions to maintain those separately. That way you don't have to ship everything at once. You can deploy an update of your solution across your environments and not the other one. A good reason to have a separate solution is if you use custom connectors in Power Platform. So it's a way to connect to your custom REST-based APIs. Those require to be deployed before the rest of your solutions. So deploy your custom connector, and then you can deploy your agent that reference the custom connector. For some reason, like there is some sort of order that needs to be respected. So it's always good like to deploy the custom connector before you make reference of it with your other artifacts like cloud flows or your agents. Okay. Some golden rules of ALM animations here. So a good rule of thumb, like make sure that whenever you start customizing an agent, you create a new agent, work in the context of solutions. It helps you make sure that whatever you do will be part of that little solution folder. See that as a folder, right? And that way, those components will inherit like the proper schema name prefix that you define on your solution. And I'll show that an example of that in a minute. So that's a best practice to always work in the context of solutions. Create separate solutions only if you need to deploy components independently. Otherwise, just keep it simple and have everything in one solution. It's okay. Use a custom publisher and prefix. So when you create a solution, and I'll show that in a minute, you can either use an existing publisher or create a new one. Instead of using like the default ones, just create a new one. I think it's better because that way you can define the prefix and it represents your organization or your project. If you have things that change across environments, like a URL that you make an HTTP request to that needs to be difference between dev, test, and prod, you can use environment variables. If you need to use secrets as part of your integrations, you can use environment variables of type secret, and those can help you integrate with an Azure Key Vault. So extra points for security and enterprise security. When you deploy from dev to any downstream environment, always deploy as managed. That way your solution is kind of locked, and it's a good thing because you don't want to like end users or makers making changes to your bot directly in production or in test. You want those changes to happen in dev. And you should only deploy as unmanaged if you're actually setting up a new dev org, because you can only export unmanaged solutions. So if you set up a new development environment for your agent, then it's a good reason to use unmanaged. Otherwise, always managed. And yes, don't do customizations outside of dev. I think that's a good rule. And we'll see that in more details, but consider automating ALM, so the deployment of your agents across dev, test, prod, for source control and automated deployment. Make it easier for you, reduce the risks of human errors, schedule deployments like this. Okay, a quick note for those who are new in Copilot Studio. You may have noticed that in Copilot Studio, we have a publish button, and it's not the same thing as publishing customizations in a solution. So I know it's confusing, but you have in Copilot Studio, when you're on an agent, a publish button. And you also have in a solution an option called publish all customizations. They have the same name, but they are not the same thing. So apologies for this. The publish button in Copilot Studio publishes the latest version of the agent to its deployed channels. So that's the moment where like everything you change in your agent, when you click publish, it will reflect to your deployed channel. So if it's an agent that's deployed to a website, those changes will be reflected on the website. Same on Teams. It's when you publish the agent. And the publish all customizations is in solutions is a concept inherited from traditional solutions in Power Platform. And that's a way to commit changes for things like Dataverse tables. So they're slightly different, not the same thing. Apologies for the confusion. Maybe we should find a new name, but just wanted to clarify that here. There was a question specifically on this. What are the specific things for Copilot Studio when it comes to ALM? And I want to call them out today. So there are a few things that you do in Copilot Studio that are not solution aware. And not being solution aware means that those changes won't flow and won't follow from dev to test to prod. And what that means is that because they don't follow the normal solution deployment, like they are not part of the solution, that means they require post-deployment steps on the downstream environment you deployed your agent to. And what that means is after you have deployed an agent to test or to prod, there are a few extra things you need to do to make sure that the agent works as expected for a few of the configuration settings I will highlight now. So the first one is Azure Application Insights. If you want your agent to send telemetry to Azure App Insights, that's something you need to do on each of your agents individually in every environment. There are good reasons to point to a different App Insights instance. You may not want to send the dev and test telemetry data to the same instance as prod. So that's why you can configure it differently. The manual authentication setting. So if you're using like the default authentication, like Authenticate with Microsoft, where you don't have anything to do or no authentication at all, then it's good. You don't have anything to do. But if you're using manual authentication because you want to embed your agent on your custom website, and that website uses Entra ID or Okta or any third-party OAuth provider, you need to reconfigure those settings on the deployed agent. So if you're using Entra ID, you need to provide the client ID, the secret, etc. on the deployed agent. They don't follow your solution deployment. Likewise, if you enable direct line, the web channel security that requires a secret in order to obtain a conversation token, that's also something that is not solution aware, and you'll have to reconfigure that option after you deploy your agent. The deployed channels, just because you have deployed your channel and the channel can be Teams, like you have to redeploy to Teams as a new app, or as we just discussed before, potentially trying to update the deployed app manifest targeting the new agent that you just deployed. You need that to do that as a post-deployment step, especially for Teams. I think for website, you should be okay because the direct line channel should be enabled automatically once you deploy the agent. But for Teams, you need to do that. And the last one is sharing, whether you expect that agent to be available to other makers, so people who can access that agent just from a configuration perspective or accessing the analytics of the agent, you need to share that again. Unless the other users are admin, then they have automatically access to all the agents in the environment, or also with end users. So if you want the agent to only be used by security group users that have access to your Teams agent, you need to make sure that this configuration is done again. I see a good question on the chat. It will not, like those things, those post-deployment things that you need to do in downstream environments will not create an unmanaged layer. Okay, those are specific configuration areas of Copilot Studio that will actually update the Copilot Studio service and not the Power Platform Dataverse customization layer. Okay.
Sorry, I have a follow-up to that. I was the one who asked that question.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I think I'm going to say your name wrong. Okay. I apologize. But if you could put your question in the tooling, and then we can make sure we have enough time to get through all the questions.
Okay, got it. No.
Thank you so much, though.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah, keep that coming. So the first thing you want to do when you create an agent, you're in dev, make sure you click those three dots and you can go to solutions. That way you can always make sure that you start from a solution. If it's a new environment, you'll see something like this. So what you can do is just hit on new solution, give it a name. It can be like the agent name, like I've created a nice Ask Me Anything agent. And don't use the default publisher. Create a new one, takes 2 clicks. For example, I'm Contoso. Okay, that's my company. The prefix is CON, so that any new artifact I create will have that prefix. That way it's a bit cleaner in terms of how I manage customizations. You can set as preferred solution so that like any new artifacts will automatically be added to that solution. And what's great is that that's it. Your solution is created. It takes a few seconds to populate the screen. And this is where like initially the solution will be empty because you just created, a container. But now you can click on new and create your first agent that you want to add to that solution. So there you go. You just add the add agent here, and you'll be redirected to the agent creation experience. You can configure however you want. Like this is my Ask Me Anything agent. And you can also see if you go to the advanced settings here under the 3 dots that it will be created as part of your Ask Me Anything solution and will have the right prefix. So that's all good. So it will set up your agent, and once ready, it will be populated with all the default topics and configuration. Okay, I'll just move to the next one. One thing that's important is once you have created your agent, let's say I've added like a knowledge source, which is learn.microsoft.com. When I go back to my solution, I see like I don't see learn.microsoft.com being added to my solution. So one thing you can do is just select the agent and click on Add Required Objects. And that way, like whatever was created but not as part of the solution will be added. So you see like it was bumped up from 13 to 14, and now my knowledge was added to my solution. Otherwise, after deploying, it would have missed from my target environment. So a little bit of an important tip to avoid having missing knowledge sources and whatnot in your agents. Now, when you're ready to go and deploy from dev to test, you just need to go to your solution overview, and there's an export button. And you'll see that what it does is it asks you like a manage, unmanaged, as we discussed earlier. I'll go for managed, of course, because it's a downstream environment. It will export the solution. You have to wait a little bit. Okay, it's done. You can then download it. It's just a zip file. And so if you then go to your target environment, you just need to switch from dev here. I'll go to test. And from test, same, you go to the solutions, and you have an option to import a solution. And so you just import the zip file that you had downloaded. Like zip files are great if you need to share a solution with a team that doesn't have access to your environment, or they're on a different tenant and it's hard to collaborate with them. Like it's good to have that way to deploy a solution. And you see, once you are importing, like it takes a few seconds to then import successfully. Once it's imported, you can see the solution under managed. And if you enter that solution, you'll see that you have the agent and all of the artifacts. And there's also a warning that you cannot directly edit the objects within a managed solution. So that's important. And so you have the Ask Me Anything agent here. Okay. And because it's managed, you can't make changes. So you'll see that the UI changes a little bit. Like it will say you can add new topics, but can't modify existing ones. And if you're on a topic and you try to make any changes, you have an error message that says like it's a managed topic, it can't be customized, and you have to go back to dev and redeploy if you want to do that. Okay, some of the best practices to make your agent ALM ready is, if you're going to use parameters that change in your ALM, like for example, a URL for your endpoints, create what we call environment variables. And that's also the same type of variable you can use as secret. Here, for example, I just use like a URL to point to a service that provides facts about cats. I thought it was a nice example from PowerCat. So add your environment variables here because you'll be able to use them then in Copilot Studio. And also that's a good place to set up connection references. So that means like mapping between your, using connectors and a specific connection. That's called a connection reference. So here I just connect, for example, for my demo to the MSN weather because it's a simple one. And once I have created like those connection reference, it's good. Or I remember like I had to edit the title a little bit. Okay, now we're good. I save. I just created those like this afternoon, so it's fresh. Here, okay. I added my connection references. I added my environment variables. So my solution now is a bit more ALM ready because that way I can change those connections and I can change those environment variables as part of my ALM. And I will show you how right now. So first, let me show how to use those environment variables and connections here. So let's say I want to create a new topic because I want my agent to provide facts about cats. That was a P0 requirement when I started this POC. So I'll just make an HTTP request. And the HTTP request, instead of just putting the URL here, I'll go to the environment and pick like the environment variable. That way I can change the URL between environments. And then I say that, I've just used the sample data it returns in JSON so that it knows what format of data it returns. I want to capture the response from that API as a cat fact. So I name my variable that way. And then I just send a little message to the user that is a cat fact. Very simple. And so now I don't even need to save, by the way. I hovered over save. I didn't need to save. And I ask, tell me something about cats. And it will run through my HTTP requests and respond with something very interesting about cats. So that's cool. Now I'm ready to save. To save, I need to provide a title for my topic, cat fact. And that's it. I'm very happy about this. Then to show you how to use the weather, that was also like a very important requirement for my WeatherBot Studio agent. I can now just use an action that's get forecast for today, a very simple one. And you'll see that it will connect to that service. And because I created the connection reference, I don't need to connect again with my user account. So I just configure this rapidly, and I think I can go and set up the connector and action. And my agent now has I'm using the connection reference, and I'm using an environment variable. Next, how cool would it be if I could automate going from dev to test and to prod without much effort? Let's use pipelines that are a great way to do this in Copilot Studio. So if we go back to your solution, first you can see that my little new topics were added. I'm happy. I'm seeing everything in my solution. I'm good. And now pipeline. So let's say I don't have a pipeline. Let's create one. So this is going to be by AMA pipeline, and I want to deploy to test through that pipeline. That's the target environment. So I create my pipeline, and it's immediately available. And when I'm ready to go, I just go say deploy here. And what's cool is that I can schedule a deployment. So great if you want to schedule later. For the example, we just do it now. And when you do that, it will look at the target environment and see if it's properly set up for the connections it needs or the environment variable values. So you have an additional screen that will pop up here to ask you, okay, I'll help you deploy, but tell me like what's the environment variable URL for the cat facts? Is the weather connector properly set up? It will show me all of this. So here it will sign me in and create a new connection for the AMA weather connection reference. And here that's the environment variable that followed through my solution deployment. But I could have enforced asking for a new value here. And there you go. I said deploy, and it's deploying to my target environment. Because it's a video, I'll just skip. Okay, we'll keep question for Q&A and for the tool for the end, because I still have some content to go through, and I see like we only have 15 minutes left in the call. Something I find amazing, and it just GA'd recently, is source control for Power Platform. So let's say I'm in Azure DevOps. I just created a project, nothing more, and I created the main branch. That's it. It's an empty Azure DevOps project. That's where I want to keep the source code of my agent. Now I can go into a solution, and there is the source control tab, and it's super cool, super fast. I can say, okay, I want for a specific solution, connect to my Azure DevOps project. And because I'm logged in, it's suggesting everything. I just need to give a root git folder name and select a branch. So I could potentially directly commit into main, or I can create a branch from main. So what that means, it will create a copy of main and call it main, dev1 here. I connect to Git. So that's a bit magic here. What happens is it's now connected to my Azure DevOps repository. And if I start refreshing, you see like it's starting to look at what is in my solution that is not in my branch. So it's looking at what's on the source control and what's not here. And so if I give it like just a few seconds, minutes, I can see like it detects what's missing from my source control. And once I'm done, like I have all my 24 artifacts, I don't have more, I can commit my changes from that dev org to my source control and repository in Azure DevOps. So let's say like this is my May updates for my agents. I click commit, and all of a sudden, in a matter of seconds, it gets committed to my branch in Azure DevOps. So I don't see it now. Let's just refresh and go back here. See the dev1 branch. If I look into it, I can see the folder. It has my solutions, my bots. I have my components, and everything is available in a human readable format. So if I go to the cat fact component, I can see like that URL we discussed and how I display facts about cats. Everything is available as a YAML. I can create pull requests if I'm happy of these changes and I want to merge them with main. I just do that. And what's cool is as you provide more updates, you'll have also like a highlighting of the things you have changed, added, or deleted. And that way you can just merge your branch into main and have a very healthy ALM source controlled without being a developer. Like this was so easy to set up. Took me a few seconds. So really, really cool stuff here. Now, what if you want to do something much more complex? It's not sufficient. You want Azure DevOps to really be the control tower of your application lifecycle management, because maybe you want to do extra checks that only Azure DevOps can do, or potentially you want to do also deploying Azure components as part of your Azure DevOps. Then you can do that with pipelines. There is something called Azure DevOps build tools that you can use in Azure DevOps. And here, for example, I'm using the Power Platform build tools. And you see it does a few things. It can publish customizations. There are a bunch of actions that you can configure. And you can see you can add code and scripts. So you can do much more. It's more complex than what you can normally do. And you can also define a branch. And here, for example, I'll run this. And it's running. And it's also does the same thing I showed a little bit in my demo before, but you could imagine this could be doing much more advanced things, like swapping files, doing some things that you need to do manually, but you want to try to automate with Azure DevOps. That's a way to potentially do this. So I won't go through the entire process, but it just deploys, and you can see this in real time, executing code and PowerShell commands for you. Cool. What if you want to automate testing of your agent? Well, for that, and because it's a crucial part, of application lifecycle management, before going to prod, you may want to test your agent. It is still running as expected. So for that, we have released a great tool called the Copilot Studio Kit. It helps you with testing, but it's not the only thing it can do. It can help you with agent inventory at the tenant level to have a good overview of all the agents deployed in your tenant. It can help you create dashboards on conversation KPIs. It can help you review agent configuration. It can help you synchronize content from SharePoint to a specific agent to upload the files to your agent. It can help you customize the look and feel of the web chat widget of your agent. So, and adaptive cards gallery, so helping you with getting started from somewhere when you build new adaptive cards. All of that is available on Copilot Studio Kit. You can install it from App Source, and it's publicly available and documented on GitHub. So have a look with those links. And this is what you can do today to test agents. You can do manual testing. So if I say hello, it says, hello, how can I help you? Cool. But that's a lot of manual tests if I want to just test if my agent is really working as expected, or if I ask it like, what is Copilot Studio because it's using knowledge, I can also do that. But it's a lot of testing and human review of the outputs. So the way to address this is to actually configure the kit to do those tests for you. So here I'm going to create my agent. This time it's Microsoft Learn agent, and it's test automation. And what I need to do, it supports like authentication. You can authenticate as the end user, but it needs the token endpoint. So just the API endpoint of my agent so that I can run the test against. So I just pasted in my agent configuration the Copilot Studio Kit. To assess the quality of AI generated answer, I'd use an AI builder prompt, so an LLM to assess the answer. And I can just say that's my agent here. Now to create test, I'll just create like a test set. So I give it a name. Same, I'll just do like a Microsoft Learn agent test set. And then I can just add new tests. And there are multiple types of tests. So you can, I'll show that here. Like you could have like a test 1 is for hello. You can have response match, topic match, generative answers, multi-tone kind of test. And basically that's what you want to send to the bot and what you want to capture as an answer and verify that it's the exact answer. So here I say, when I say hello, I expect, hello, how can I help you today? A very deterministic test, right? Now I may have like a more open-ended test. Like I want to ask, what is Copilot Studio? So that's my test number 2. And this time I choose generative answers. And I expect this to be answered by the AI. And the expected answer, you will always get a different response from Copilot Studio, but I will give it like, okay, something like this. Doesn't have to be identical, but it's basically, we'll use AI to assess if the response that we got was similar to what we had expected. And then we run the test. So we're just running a test is like taking like a test set and running it against a specific configuration. Now the test execution is in progress. The results are not yet there. But if I go back to test results, you'll see that my tests are running. Like I have a little indicator of this here. And there are multiple things here. But if I just go a little bit further, like in a few, I think this one was, I don't know, a bit more than a minute. Okay, now it was all complete. It ran okay. It's 100% test completed. It's good, happy. And I can see that I automatically sent to the agent the hello question and got a success on the response. And I also sent what is Copilot Studio, and my AI assessment of the response was also a success. So potentially you can, I've seen great colleagues who integrated that testing as part of pipelines that I demonstrated earlier, and they can only deploy to a downstream environment if they get, I don't know, 90% of above for a test run. So really cool stuff for the Copilot Studio Kit. Now, what, and I know like I feel like I'm rushing and sorry for this, but what if you want to create reusable assets across agents and environments so that multiple dev teams can work on different parts of an agent? So that's possible with a concept called component collections. And what that essentially means is that an agent can reference component collections that contain different artifacts like topics, actions, and knowledge. And the best example I can give is imagine you want to create like a single agent that addresses all of your IT topics, HR topics. And you may want those collections to be handled by different teams. Imagine like the IT dev team is working on the IT topics and they will ship when they are ready. Same for the HR team, they have their own topics and actions and knowledge. So what you do is that you provision like a distinct dev environment for them so they can work in isolation. But once you want your master Contoso agent, like the Ask Me Anything agent, once you want to reference content from the IT topics or HR collection, that's where it's coming handy, because you can deploy those to your environment, and you can reference those topics, actions, and knowledge from those collections, or as things you reference from your agent. So your agent can actually be a combination of its own topic action knowledge plus the collections you add to those agents. So that's really, really powerful. And the way you do that, here is a quick example of how you create a new solution for those. And we can actually fast forward. You've seen the solution creation already. I create in here, when I select agent, when to create new components, I create component collection. And this will get me to a screen where I just say, like, this is my HR tools collection. It contains my HR knowledge and actions. And this is the solution I want to add it to. And once it's done, it will create this artifact. For now, it's not installed on any agent, and it doesn't have components. But once you connect it to an agent, like the Ask Me Anything agent, I can now add to my component collection either like existing artifact from the connected agent, or I can create new. It's in preview, it will come soon. But let's say I referenced like this Ask Me Anything, where I had created like the learn knowledge, the cat fact, the MSN weather action. Now we can say, okay, now these are not part of that Ask Me Anything agent. They are part of my collection, and they are actually referenced by the Ask Me Anything agent. So that way I can reference those from that Ask Me Anything agent, and I can handle the life cycle of that HR tools collection independently. And what's cool is that your collections can be tested with a Copilot. So you have a drop down of your existing Copilot here, agents, and you can just test it here. And I love that as I was recording like that demo, and it's the first time I think I saw text streaming coming to Copilot Studio. So I was super excited about this because it's coming. So that's really, really great.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Henri. Thank you so much, Hazem. Yeah, everybody have a good morning, evening, night, afternoon. Yeah, see you next time.